What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Good View Woodworks channel. My name is Nathan, and in this video, we're going to be going live, obviously, for a question that has been asked on this channel well over 100 times. And that question is, what type of epoxy do I use? And there is a quick, short answer, and there's also a long answer. We'll kind of get into both um, right here, right now. And so I'm glad you guys are watching. Whoever's watching, shoot a comment over and let me know what's going on and where you're coming from, where you're shouting out from. And also, if you want to support this channel, feel free to hit me up with a super chat. If not, that's cool too. We're gonna go over some really cool stuff. Nick Sheldon says, "Hola, bro." What's up, Nick? But before I keep you guys waiting, let's get right into it. So, a bunch of people always ask me, what epoxy do I use? Which epoxy do I use? A guy just emailed me a bunch of pictures where his stuff was setting up too fast in his buckets. Now, it all depends on what your project is. Now, if you are building what you see online as a river table or anything that has a big void, a large void you want to fill, it's using a lot of volume at one time, you're going to want to use casting epoxy. Now, I'll grab some right here so you can see it. Right here, we have some Stone Coat Supercast. This is a gallon and a half. As you can tell, you have a gallon of epoxy and a half a gallon of hardener. Now, that brand of epoxy is made to pour up to 2 inches thick and all in one pour. And so the reason why I wanted to show this video was to give you guys the differences, because this question's been asked all the time. And so when I talk about casting epoxy, what I mean is a slow curing epoxy that is used to fill voids and also used to capture things in epoxy. So if you've seen people like put toy cars or shells or river rocks or anything like that in epoxy, you want to use a casting epoxy. There's a few differences. We'll get on with that just in a little bit. But the other type of epoxy is called like a countertop epoxy or a tabletop epoxy. It's for a coating. So if you are turning tumblers, or you want to use it as a finish on a product or a project, or if you if you're an artist and you want to cover your canvas, what you want to use is a finish type of epoxy, which is like a countertop epoxy. Stone Coat also has like art resin, which is a little bit different, sets up quicker or whatever, but most of the time it's for a finish, and I have some of that as well. So the second type of epoxy is a countertop epoxy. This is a Stone Coat Countertops countertop epoxy. If you notice, the jugs are the same size. Part A you have and part B. So this is a 1 gallon kit. You have a half gallon of resin and a half gallon of hardener. And the reason is, for that epoxy, it's a 1-to-1 ratio, and you want to that epoxy there is meant for a countertop or a finish or a tabletop or whatever, and it has different characteristics than the casting epoxy. So what I want to go over is the reasons why we use two different types of epoxies and what the differences are. So like I said before, we're using a casting epoxy for a river table or anything where you're pouring a large void with thickness. So anything over 1/8 or 1/4 inch thick max, anything over that, you're going to want to use a casting epoxy so that you can pour it all at one time. Now, the benefits to a casting epoxy, and that's one of them, is that you can pour super thick. Stone Coat Countertop Supercast, you can pour up to 2 inches thick. Incredible Solutions epoxy, casting epoxy, the one that I've used in the past couple videos, also says you can pour up to 2 inches thick. In some cases, you can pour up to 3 inches thick, and that's if you cool down the epoxy so it sets up slower. Now, so that's a benefit, and the reason why you want to use a casting epoxy is because it sets up slower. You don't get the bubbles and overheating and cracking that you do from a resin that uses a 1-to-1 ratio. But it also doesn't have the UV inhibitors. It doesn't have the scratch resistance or the heat resistance that a countertop epoxy does. Now, a casting epoxy also is going to heat up less and also shrink less, um, generally speaking, when it comes to pouring large voids. Okay, so hopefully you guys understand what a casting epoxy is for, and if you if you don't if you have any questions that I didn't cover on this casting epoxy, go ahead and leave a comment there. I'll get to them as soon as I can. But let's get on to the countertop epoxy. So most countertop epoxies or finishing epoxies are going to use a 1-to-1 ratio instead of a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 ratio like the casting epoxy is. And that means it's going to set up faster. Okay. And that's why you only want to pour it an eighth of an inch thick each time for a finishing resin like the Stone Coat countertop epoxy. Um, what's cool though, why we use that instead of a casting epoxy is because you can only pour an eighth of an inch thick at a time. If you do pour more, it's going to overheat, it's going to crack, it's going to cause a lot of bubbles, and it's not meant for that. But what's cool about this epoxy is that when you finish your product, to give it the durability and things that it needs, that's what you want to use if you want to use an epoxy finish. Whereas with the casting epoxy, once you pour it, sand it flat and everything, it does need a finish over top, whether you use oil-based finishes or polyurethane or epoxy or whatever you want, whichever finish you want to use. It needs to have a finish over it because it doesn't have the heat resistance, it doesn't have the scratch resistance, and it doesn't have the UV resistance that the countertop epoxy has. So when I'm generally speaking, when I'm making a river table, I prefer to use a casting epoxy and then a coating or a finish epoxy over that. And the reason is because it keeps the wood from taking in and releasing moisture. So I always use dry wood because of that. But what I'm saying is it won't shrink and move and all that in different climates if it's fully coated. So if you cast a river and then you coat the entire river with a finishing epoxy, air cannot and temperature change can't affect the wood because it can't expand and contract. So the good thing is it's not going to crack, it's not going to move or twist over time if you fully coat it with this countertop epoxy. And so those are generally the other uses. And once again, the countertop epoxy is heat resistant. And I think the Stone Coat countertop stuff is heat resistant up to 400 degrees. It also is scratch resistant, and it has UV inhibitors, and so it's UV resistant. Now, as far as UV resistance goes, all epoxies yellow in direct sunlight. And so they will yellow over time, even if you use the one with the UV resistance in it. It just won't yellow as much as ones that don't have the UV inhibitors in it. So if you want to have an epoxy finish, but you don't want it to yellow, you can use a polyaspartic finish, and that is keeps it from turning yellow. Okay, so if you guys have any questions on the finish epoxy, leave a comment there, and I will get to those as well. So I do see a couple of comments here, and I'm going to get right to them. And so I just want to say hello to Nick, Bruce, Travis, Gary, T&J Outdoors, Ferguson Woodworks. T&J says, just ordered something that Credible Solutions casting epoxy. Way to go. Second start to the right. How's it going? Jive Boys, what's up? Gary, JJL Forge, and Rumple, how's it going? So Rumple asked, do you pour your tables upside down or right side up? That's a good question. I just figure out which side of the wood that I like, and if that's the top, I put it up. So I always pour them right side up, I guess is the question. And then there's been a couple of times where once I took it out of the mold, I flipped it over. I like the other side better. So it really doesn't matter which way you pour because you still have to finish both sides, and that requires cutting to length, cutting to width, and sanding and finishing both sides. Um, Melanie says hello, and Elizabeth says thanks a lot for the information. So yeah, guys. So sorry, got a bunch of motorcycles driving by. So that's it for this video. That's all I wanted to go over because the question has been asked so many times. And if there's something that I didn't go over, I want you guys to leave a comment here, and I'll do my best to get to it. Also, this is just a heads up. I'll be doing a short video later, but we will be giving away this gallon and a half kit soon. So be prepared for that video. And I hope you guys, and it will be for US only. Sorry guys who are not in the US, but we will be giving away this casting epoxy kit. But that is another video. And if you would do me a favor, please click the thumbs up button. Give me a couple of likes here. That way it puts this higher up in the queue. And thanks again, guys, for joining me on this live video. And like always, thanks for hanging out with us.